I've always loved romance novels, but only the dead ones. Jane Austen novels, Jane Eyre, North and South give me repression, longing, and a marriage at the end, and I'm usually happy. But modern romance, I always assumed I would find pretty bland. So this February, I decided to test that assumption. I read contemporary romance and a couple of historical bodice rippers to see if I've been unfair to the genre or if my suspicions were right. Let's jump in. My first foray into contemporary romance was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I was pleasantly surprised at first that this seemed to be an intentional inversion of the big city girl with high-powered job, visits charming small town, falls in love, and learns to appreciate the small things in life trope. Nora is unapologetic about her love for New York City and her devotion to her job as a successful literary agent. The story doesn't view this as a flaw, but she is in some ways a typical closed off to love kind of character. By the end, it feels less like an inversion of the trope than I was hoping for. It plays with it, but it doesn't fully invert it. I kind of wished we got a story about a man from a small town who has disdain for the big city life and big city people and begrudgingly visits NYC for some reason. He meets a native New Yorker who challenges his preconceived notions, and he slowly falls in love with the Met and the constant buzz of activity and the empanadas from the bodega down the street. I would love to know if anyone has written that story because I would read that one. The actual love story, which is what we're reading these for, it was fine. There were some slightly contrived plot points to make it difficult for the protagonists to be together, and then an all too convenient resolution to make it possible. And just overall, I felt like they didn't really have enough time in the small town to develop the depth of feeling and the relationship that they developed. Also, while I enjoyed this more than I thought I would, I had to look up the main character's name to film this video, and I can't remember the guy's name either. And that tells me that the characters weren't all that memorable, especially given that I just finished reading this like a week ago. My back is aching from a long work day. I am going to add an extra pillow. Okay, that's better. Am I old now? Does this mean that I'm old? Okay, I'm gonna point out a couple of like really nitpicky things. One of them is a big pet peeve of mine, and it's when the author tries to explain things to you that they think you don't understand, even though you do. So for instance, there's a quote in the book that says the Midas touch, as in everything he touches turns to gold. And it's like, I know the Midas story. But even if I didn't, I would still prefer not to have it explained to me because I would rather look it up myself if I feel like I need that context. Otherwise, it kind of pulls me out of the story when I can feel the author trying to like insert a little lesson about something that they assume I probably don't know. My other annoyance was the increasingly ridiculous attempts to describe his eye color. So we start with amber, but then we graduate to honey, burnt sugar, melted gold. Then we get this quote, his gaze is melting back into honey, caramel, maple. And finally, black hole eyes, sticky trap eyes, decadent dessert eyes. Sticky trap eyes, like I'm trying to picture what sticky trap color even is. I had to literally Google that, but it's just not necessary. We can stick with amber and maybe throw in honey every now and then, and I think we're good. One thing I did like was the meta commentary about storytelling and the sentimental impact of books. Towards the end of the novel, Nora explains why she likes the stories that don't wrap up into a tidy, predictable, happy ending. And she says this, that is what I'm looking for every time I flip to the back of a book, compulsively checking for proof that in a life where so many things have gone wrong, there can be beauty too, that there is always hope, no matter what. Those were the endings I found solace in, the ones that said, yes, you have lost something, but maybe someday you'll find something too. I relate to that, but it's kind of ironic because Book Lovers is in fact one of those stories with a predictable, tidy, happy ending. Okay, my next read was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, and similarly, I started out enjoying this more than anticipated for a couple of reasons. I liked the occasionally sarcastic tone of the protagonist's inner voice, which was sometimes humorous. Here's a sample quote. I get to bleed for a week without the sweet release of death. I also really appreciated the heavier topics that Jimenez thoughtfully tackles here, things like anxiety, chronic illness, abandonment trauma. The brother of the protagonist suffers from stage 4 kidney disease, and her love interest has severe social anxiety. And I looked into it. The author herself has struggled with these kinds of issues. I like that she chose to incorporate these into the story and that she tried to depict them in an honest way. The other thing I liked was that Jimenez wasn't like drawing things out too much in the plot. The brother with stage 4 kidney disease, he is waiting for an organ donor and it's not looking good. And I knew very, very early on that obviously the love interest in the story was going to become the organ donor. And I thought that it would just go on before he finally decided that he was going to donate an organ and that would be presented as a reveal. But in fact, he decides really early on in the story and we move on. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. And then I thought, well, now it's going to take forever for people to find out that he's the organ donor because he wanted to be anonymous, and specifically for the protagonist in this story to find out. But she also finds out pretty much right away because somebody lets it slip. So that was nice. I was like, okay, we're moving along with this story. But then past the first third or so of the novel, it lost me. Suddenly the conflict relied so heavily on miscommunication that I just couldn't get into the story. I couldn't bring myself to believe that they wouldn't have clarified this misunderstanding almost immediately in one simple conversation, and that ruined the enjoyment of the rest of the story for me. Also, the love interest is so completely faultless, unless you consider struggling with anxiety a flaw, that I just couldn't believe that he was a real person. Here's one quote about him. "I liked that he always had classical music playing on the lowest volume. He used scent beads in his laundry, and his towels always smelled like lavender. I liked that he burned candles when it rained." That's a good idea. I should start burning candles when it rains, but who is this guy? He's also endlessly patient, forgiving, and understanding. He's never angry, even when it might be warranted. And I just couldn't bring myself to see him as real. A quick note about People You Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This one doesn't count because I did not read the book, but I learned that one of Henry's films had been made into a Netflix movie, so I decided to watch since I'm now a student of the romance genre. And I'll just say in brief that I did like this story. I think the love story hit a little harder because the characters developed their relationship over a much longer period of time. Still, with only 2 modern romance books under my belt, I already found myself predicting certain characters' lines. When the guy says, "My mom never met Sarah," I supplied, "She died when I was little," at the same time that he said that. So, of course, I can't know if the book would have left a similar impression, but based on the film alone, this one was sweet. Not especially memorable, but sweet. Okay, let's get back to books. Next up, we've got Highland Fire by Tanya and Cosby. This isn't one of the romance genre authors that I'm constantly hearing about, but I had downloaded this to my Kindle a few years ago when it was offered for free, I think. And I figured this was the perfect time to read it. The little review that I jotted down as soon as I finished reading the book said, well, this was bad in all the ways I expected it to be, so I still enjoyed it. Here's the thing, book lovers and yours truly are surely objectively better books. They were working with a predictable formula, but still trying to achieve some emotional depth within that formula. Highland Fire is not trying to do that. The characters are cardboard cutout pretty people, and yet I had a better time reading it. I assumed this was more in the bodice ripper category of the romance genre, and that was accurate. This book is unapologetically what it is. I mean, look at the cover. I'm going to put it up here somewhere. Look at the font. I'll give you guys a few seconds to sit with this brief sample of the writing where I have highlighted some key sentences or phrases. The eye roll was for the fact that the main character has perfectly perky breasts and a flat belly, despite the fact that she has had a baby before. You would think this wasn't written by a woman, but it was. We also get the overused and oft maligned, "She expelled a breath she hadn't even realized she held." This was rather silly, and I wouldn't read any more books in this Highland series. If I wanted a hot Highlander character, I would stick with the Outlander series, although those books are like 1,000 pages each, so they're much more of a commitment. But all that said, I came to this book with pretty low expectations, and I can appreciate that it did not try to exceed them. Okay, next is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I did ask the internet, and that's how it told me it was pronounced, but you know, I don't necessarily trust AI. So this was the first romance read that I really genuinely liked. Yay! Alex is the son of the President of the United States, a woman elected after Obama, so you know, fiction, and Henry is the Prince of England. They meet, they insult each other a lot, they bond, they fall in love. The way this relationship develops is both charming and actually believable. The stakes are higher because these two are very important people for whom PR is critical, and their sexuality presents an added obstacle, especially considering who they are. There's something about the warm, sparkly, witty, at times acerbic tone of the writing, and particularly the dialogue, that I especially love. I kept thinking that it reminded me of romantic comedies that I grew up with, and then I watched an interview with the author in which she talks about how late 90s romantic comedies are kind of like part of her DNA, and I thought, yeah, that tracks. Here's one quote that I wrote down totally out of context, but that I think is pretty representative. Stop trying to Jane Austen my life. Alex's insult for Henry's brother, Philip, is he looks like a stock photo, which is just a hilarious put down. I remember all the characters' names, not just the main characters. They are lovable, and I found myself wanting to be like friends with them, wanting to be in their group chat. On a more serious note, this story addresses themes of identity in really thoughtful, multifaceted ways that I appreciated. So it's not just the humor that made this an enjoyable read. Full transparency, I haven't completely finished the book yet. I'm almost done, but I didn't finish in time for filming. However, I feel like I've read enough to confidently recommend the book, as long as you're okay with explicit sex scenes, because they're explicit. Also, I know that there's a film version of this that was executive produced by the author. So once I'm done reading, I'm excited to go watch that. Okay, my final romance book is another win. I started reading Romancing the Duke by Tessa after I had started Red, White, and Royal Blue, but I finished it first because it was a rather short read. I actually read this by accident because I thought that it was a book by Julia Quinn, who is the author of the Bridgerton series, and I thought it was like a book outside the Bridgerton universe by that same author. Turns out it was not by Julia Quinn, it's just that Julia Quinn had like written a blurb in promotion of this book, but I'm glad that I came across it. Like Red, White, and Royal Blue, this one is pretty explicit and also very witty and humorous, but the setting and the story are completely different. The main character's name is Isolde Ophelia Goodnight, and the Duke's name is Ransom, so we're off to a promising start. Both of her parents dead, Isolde, or Izzy, is surprised to learn that she's been bequeathed a dilapidated castle, but there's still a duke in it, and he says it's his. Oh, and when she first meets him, she literally swoons, as in like passes out. And also, he's blind, which is convenient because now he can be attracted to her. Anyway, she's not leaving, and he isn't either, so now they're stuck together. Along with his faithful manservant and a young lady that Izzy invites to stay in order to safeguard propriety, which lasts like 0.2 seconds. There's a cosplay army intent on protecting Izzy because she's a character in her father's fairy tale knight saga. There's a violent pet weasel. There's bones discovered in the castle from long dead bodies, and other fun things. This is also unapologetically a bodice ripper, but unlike Highland Fire, this is genuinely funny, and the stereotypes are employed with tongue firmly planted in cheek. So here's some sample quotes. Have you truly made love on horseback? Is that how you were injured? Next one. He threw her over his shoulder with the ease of a man who has tossed many a woman over his shoulder. This was definitely not his first go at lady tossing, but it was definitely Izzy's first time being tossed, and she had no idea how to respond. And then here's a brief little dialogue. You are in D-A-N-ger. Your spelling is a bit scary. I could ravish you. This gave me major Princess Bride or Robin Hood Men in Tights vibes, which for me is a major compliment. Despite the unseriousness of the story, the main character does have a genuine personality here, and I found myself rooting for everybody. I'm likely to try another work by Tessa when I'm in the mood for this type of humor. All right, so what have I learned about myself while doing this mini romance reads marathon? I wanted to figure out why I liked some of these and not others, and see if there was any kind of pattern. The fact that my two favorite reads happen to be the spiciest is, I'm pretty sure, just a coincidence. But what's immediately obvious to me is that I like it when these are playful, witty, and irreverent. And if it's not going to be quirky or funny, then it needs to have real stakes. It needs to have believable conflict. Why is it that I love Jane Austen novels, but can't seem to get into most of these more contemporary romance novels? She employs tropes as well. She's got enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, etc. Well, other than the exceptional writing, just from the point of view of craft, is the longing. It's all the repression, all the things left unsaid, things that don't really work for storytelling in the modern context, because a lot of what used to be taboo or forbidden or socially frowned upon no longer is. So then we have to manufacture the conflict. This is in part why Red, White, and Royal Blue was my favorite read. Other than the humor, there is something grand about that romance because the stakes were believably higher. This is what the Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez books lacked for me. They're definitely better than a cheesy, formulaic Hallmark movie, but they're not as great as something like When Harry Met Sally, which has witty banter and really fleshed out characters that feel real and just so much heart. And at least I can watch a Hallmark movie in just an hour and a half while having a glass of wine with some girlfriends. I started reading an Ali Hazelwood book on audio. I'm 2 hours in. I will be finishing it because I'm a completionist, and that was the last author that I had wanted to get to for this video. But it's already blending together with the Henry and Jimenez books for me. I already forgot the characters' names, even though I read some of it today, and I know that it's going to fall into that mid category for me of romance. I absolutely respect all of these authors. In fact, I think it's probably really hard to write these, formula or no formula. I think this is a genre that's much more difficult to write than it seems. And I also totally get why some readers love these kinds of stories and find them really comforting. It's just ultimately not for me, and that's fine. But now I have a better understanding of what kind of romance reads I do like, and I can make choices more confidently moving forward. And there we have it. Those were my February romance reads. I'm curious, do you love the contemporary romance genre, hate it, indifferent? And in your view, what makes a good romance? Please leave your thoughts down in the comments, and romance or not, happy Valentine's Day and happy reading.